we live in such a world where so many societal issues have become almost like people's gods because the Lord is hastening his work, Satan
Mhm.
is also hastening his work,
Mhm.
right? And we know that so many wonderful members of the church are going to struggle in these latter days.
Mhm.
As a teacher, whether it be in elders quorum, whether it be in Sunday school or anywhere within the church, we have a great responsibility to make sure that we hold true to what the prophets and apostles have taught us in these latter days, and to be able to convey that so that people feel the Spirit and leave class feeling like they are maybe a step or
Mhm.
two or half a step or 3 steps, however many steps closer to
Mhm.
the Lord.
All right. Hey, everyone. It's Tyron. We are here on the LDS True Living here, and we are joined by a very, very special guest. This is I call him Jay, but yeah, Peavy. I would normally in the past call you Elder Peavy because we serve missions together.
Yes.
But you're coming to us from South Carolina, and this is the beauty of this technology is we have the chance to be able to bring people in, link them in, and go over some cool gospel topics. But before we go further, please, Jay, introduce yourself. Tell us all about you, your family, and then we'll kind of jump into what is the hot topic for today.
All right. Well, Tyron, it's good to see you, buddy. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, as you said, I'm from South Carolina, born and raised. I am a uh, fourth generation member. My great
Wow.
grandparents joined back in the early 1900s, and my great grandfather did not. Cool little story, though. Back then, the missionaries would travel through the countryside and stay at people's homes. And although he did not join the church, he would sit out on the front porch with a shotgun
Wow.
and make sure no one came to bother the missionaries as they taught his wife and their kids.
Right.
18 were baptized, save one.
Right on.
So yeah,
Wow.
yeah, so kind of a cool story.
Hmm.
I like that. Yeah, so uh, born and raised in South Carolina, married now for I'm in my third year of marriage to my beautiful wife Emily,
You're a
and
veteran.
yeah, so a burly veteran of marriage. So yes, if you have any questions, please ask, and I will answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so yeah, so Tyron and I, we served a mission together in the Utah Provo mission. Matter of fact, what were
Hmm.
we were companions for what, all of
Not
a
very
week
long. Yeah, not very long.
on campus at BYU. I
Mhm,
I venture to say, and I tell people this, that in that week,
mhm.
I, and Elder Graves covered all 18 stakes at
Yeah,
the time at BYU. So I venture to say that we covered more stakes than any companionship
yeah,
maybe has ever covered.
yeah,
Um,
that is absolutely could be possible.
yeah.
Yep,
So a neat little nugget there.
yeah.
But yeah, so we served on campus at BYU. I was emergency transferred off of BYU, not because I had a bunch of offers for marriage, but an elder needed a companion, and I was the man for the
Yeah,
job. But yeah, I believe you were our district leader at the time,
yeah, yep.
and I remember you being a very stalwart missionary, and
I tried
I
to be.
learned. Well, sometimes when you're Elder Graves was a trip, and he
Yeah.
kept us laughing. So I
Oh,
miss
yeah.
him. I hope he's
Yeah,
doing well.
yeah.
But it's been good to reconnect
Mhm,
over these last few years through
mhm,
reunions and through social media and
mhm.
things. And so it's a pleasure and it's an honor uh,
Yeah.
to be able to join you, and very humbled that you would ask me to join your podcast.
Well, that's very nice. I mean, I really hope that because we're a part of a WhatsApp group with
Hmm.
fellow returned missionaries that served at the same time with President Gregson, who's now passed on. And I really, now we kind of post with me and my wife, we post our YouTube channel videos, our episodes there. I hope people get a chance to enjoy that, and we'll do the same. I hope that they get to watch this and they kind of see some of the people that served in that mission, because it's is
Right.
absolutely, I think, and I think all missionaries think this other mission was the best mission you could possibly be a part of, right?
Yes.
Some people may laugh and chuckle, thinking, "Why did you go to Utah? What work did you do? There is no work there." And in actuality, there's is so much work to do there, and we had so many opportunities to teach. And certainly at BYU campus, there was no exception. We just basically taught all day long. It was one of it's is by far my favorite area, was serving on campus. So I'm grateful that I got to spend that little time with you, but then also got to go on to spend another few months with
Yeah.
other companions.
Most definitely. I like to tell people that um, with what we were able to experience in Utah, in a lot of ways, especially I think at BYU, we saw how fruitful missionary work can be when it's done the way that the Lord intended it to be done.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because how many times did we get a call from someone,
Mhm.
"Hey, my roommates are returned missionaries. They've told me all about the church."
Mhm.
And basically, we would have to go in and make sure all the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed,
Mhm.
and make sure things were done the way the
Yeah.
Lord prescribed.
Mhm.
And it made our job, if
Job.
you will,
Yeah.
not only easier, but so much more pleasurable, um, because you really got to see the fruit of the Spirit working in those
Mhm.
individuals' lives and the joy of the gospel because they had what President Hinckley said, a friend, a calling, and nurturing by the good word of God pretty much before we got there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There, a lot of
And
them were
and
already
so,
active.
yeah, and in many instances. So
Yeah.
it was really neat to see how it could all come together if everybody worked together,
Yeah.
for the cause.
Yeah, and we get to see this a little bit in sort of a microcosm in some areas outside of Utah, like here in the Houston area. There are some pockets within the say Houston circle we have that has a really strong concentration of church members, and you can see that you can feel that sort of thing that you feel in Utah, where you've got all that unity and you've got a lot of people being able to serve a lot of people at the same time. And that's really cool because you can see how the Lord would want it to be, right? If we had a much higher concentration of members around the world. And it's a bit like looking into the future, because certainly the growth rate of the church is on such a trajectory that fast forward, if the millennium doesn't come anytime soon, fast forward, 400 or 500 years from now, the church will certainly be a dominant force within the world, and this will be a very common thing throughout the world, to have so many church members in such high concentration being able to work together to be able to help so many more people. So Utah is definitely that microcosm of what that can be in the future.
I agree. I agree. We were definitely blessed,
Yeah.
and we've been able to carry that, and those that we served with have been able to carry that all over the world and try to replicate it.
Mhm. Yep.
And take what
Yep.
we learn. So it's a wonderful thing. I highly recommend a
Mhm.
mission, even if you aren't blessed to get called to Utah.
Mhm.
I highly recommend them.
Well, yeah, speaking of that, I mean, we actually talked about doing a three-part sort of series here with you, or in one of the three topics, not the one we're going to discuss today, but one of the three is going to be about mission calls, and do we feel like young men, and maybe by extension young women, are still called and expected to serve missions?
Mhm.
So we're going to talk about that.
Yep.
But today we're actually going to focus on a topic that is near and dear to your heart, in what you do in the church, and that we're going to speak to the gospel learning, sort of, what that's like. And then specifically, when is it appropriate within a class setting to correct or to interject and either add nuance to something that's being taught, or just flat out say, hey, I don't think that that's correct, what is being taught. That's not necessarily our doctrine. And
Mhm.
then to take the time to correct. And what is the appropriate process to do that? Um,
Yeah.
that can happen in Utah, that can happen in South Carolina, that can happen in Houston, that can happen in Africa and Australia and anywhere within the world. But what's the process for us to be able to do that? And it's not just something that's localized within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it's also something that you'll find in other churches too, where a pastor may be quoting from a scripture in the Bible, and then someone within the congregation or within his ear, the sound of his voice hears that and is like, "Hey, that I don't think that's the correct interpretation of that verse." And then what is the process to
Mhm.
address a doctrine that you may not feel is correct? And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about when I asked you, "Hey, would you like to come on the podcast?" Maybe you can give some insight as to why this was relevant to you that you actually wanted to discuss it.
Yeah, for one, I teach elders quorum, so I am sensitive to um, trying to stay true to the doctrines of Jesus Christ and the doctrines of the church, so that I don't confuse anyone or anything like that. But also, we live in such a world where so many societal issues have become almost like people's gods, if you will.
Mhm.
And because the Lord is hastening his work, as was the talk that we discussed in Elders Quorum today, Satan is also hastening his work, right? And we know that so many wonderful members of the church are going to struggle in these latter
Mhm.
days.
Mhm.
And as a teacher, whether it be in elders quorum, whether it be in Sunday school or anywhere within the church, we have a great responsibility to make sure that we hold true to what the prophets and apostles have taught us in these latter days, and to be able to convey that so that people feel the spirit and leave class feeling like they are maybe a step or two or half a step or three steps, however many steps closer to
Mhm.
the Lord,
Mhm.
because of what we've discussed in class.
So
And
would you say that, so first of all, you mentioned elders quorum, that you teach in elders quorum. So just so that maybe our non-LDS viewers would understand. So elders quorum is basically a group of, it's a quorum of in this case men who are getting together every other Sunday. This is going to change in September where we'll be meeting every week, but we'll get together every other Sunday for an hour after our sacrament meeting, which is the primary meeting that we have on Sunday. But during elders quorum, we get together, there's a lesson that's taught, generally by someone either in the presidency or someone that's called to be a teacher there. But what you're saying is that because today there are so many things that are distracting and that can find them themselves sort of ideologies that sound really good, but
right,
these ideologies are starting to permeate themselves within the doctrine that is being taught over the pulpit or within the doctrine being taught in some of these elders quorum classes. And because of that, we have to be very careful that we don't get too far outside of sort of the trunk of the tree, sort of the core of the gospel. We don't get out on the branches where it's much easier for us to fall, but that we stick to that, because there is such a temptation to start to incorporate some of these what sound like really good ideologies, but actually can be maybe more of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Is that maybe a way to summarize or provide a synopsis of what you're saying?
yeah, I would definitely, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Mhm.
It's Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's I think it's easy for people to want to stray one way or the other. And I don't know. I can't speak for other religious sects, but sometimes in the church we may feel, oh, man, I've heard that. I've heard that since I was a kid. Right? It's the same thing every Sunday. So we may
Mhm.
try to look for new angles, which is great, right?
Mhm. Try to keep it
But
interesting.
try to keep it interesting, right? As
Mhm.
long as things stay centered on the gospel of Jesus Christ,
Mhm.
right?
Would you
And
say would you say that staying centered on Christ and really, really, really staying on that topic is more important now than maybe it has been 10, 20 years ago, where maybe some of these wolves in sheep's clothing were not as prevalent? Or do you feel like it's the same as it's always been, and we're just kind of recycling the same thing over and over again?
Can I say, man, can I almost talk out of both sides of my mouth here? That I
I guess
don't
so.
know that it's more important, but perhaps a renewed focus to make it the forefront of how we teach in the Savior's
Mhm.
way, right?
Yeah.
You know, we learn in teaching the Savior's way, you know, that very early on you're to open the Scriptures
Mhm.
and teach from the Scriptures, right? And and so if we do that, then we're getting direct words from the prophets and from Christ Himself. So I think that that is a great way to start that conversation. Um, my wife is a convert to the church, and you know, you asked why this may be relevant. You know, so she didn't grow up hearing the doctrines found within the LDS Church,
Mhm.
and so um, when she joined, there were a lot of things new to her, and so I won't say that she leans on me, but she appreciates hearing simple, true doctrine, right? And not not doctrine with a or not a lesson with an agenda, not not something that someone may have heard on the History Channel
Mhm.
about characters
Yeah.
of the Bible, and it get
Yeah.
carried into class,
Yeah.
right? And so so that's one reason why I brought this subject up. Um,
Can I share something with you that kind of reminds me of a discussion I was having with someone who's not of our faith.
sure.
We were discussing theology and theological education, the idea that you go to school to learn about God and his origin and so forth, and that in the traditional vein of how you would do this going to a school is that you wouldn't generally go there just to learn how to preach the word and to preach a very basic doctrine. You actually go there and then they have to fill up those classes with actual stuff. And what they end up
Hmm.
doing is they end up getting into a lot of the details of the contextual scenario or situation, the cultural context or the historical context of a lot of things that are dealing with the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so you start to break down the Old Testament and New Testament in such a way that people who go into theological school aren't really ready for, right? Because they've either grown up as a pastor's son or something like that, and or they've grown up with this idea that, hey, I can make a living as a pastor, so let me go to school because I really love this stuff. And then they end up getting this worldview of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it becomes very secular. They start really criticizing, Moses parting the Red Sea, and did that really
Hmm.
happen? What's the reality? Could that really happen? Was there really a flood? We don't really have any proof of that. This is the proof we do have. So it's a lot of this kind of analyzing. And what happens is that you end up getting more often, than I'm sure they'd want to admit, but you get some people that actually start to lose their faith a little bit. And I was having this discussion, and we were talking about what pastors, when they get together, when they're not preaching, he was explaining to me, the person I was talking to, is that when they get together, they have a certain, let's say, lingo and a certain way of talking to each other because they know, hey, we've gone to theological school, we know the background, we know the context, and we can talk about those things because we know it. But
Right.
at church, we don't go into those types of things. And the reason why is because people didn't come to church to learn about nuance and contextual clues related to ancient manuscripts. They came to church because they want hope. They want something to be able to justify why they're going through the misery that they might be living through right now, right? And so the same thing is true for us at church. People are not going there to learn about all of the historical facts or what we consider to be facts of the Book of Mormon. They're going there to learn about hope and how we can have more hope in Jesus Christ so that I can make it through the next week, so that I don't give up on my family or on my life, or I, that. So at the root of it, religion is there to have hope. And these classes should be built around giving people hope through Jesus Christ, that they have something better that is coming after this life, right? As opposed to trying to create a bunch of theologians out of, a bunch of Sunday school students, so to speak.
Sure. And so I in what you're saying, it's paramount, as we used to teach, right, when we taught the discussions, to help others feel and recognize the Spirit so that it can give them that hope and strengthen them. I remember distinctly, I was struggling big time in life. Just, I had hit rock bottom, right? And I didn't want to go to church this particular Sunday, but I went. And it was nothing about what was said from the pulpit, but the Spirit told me exactly something that I needed to do to improve on, that I don't think I would have gotten had I not been there, and had the Spirit not been present, because of what you were talking about with correct principles being taught, um, and um, the Spirit being there to teach, right? That things were focused on Christ and not just on historical data and
Hmm.
information, which is very interesting.
It's
And if we
cool. Yeah.
understand culture, we can understand maybe where people are coming from, why
Yeah.
they did what they did, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love
Um,
that stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And so, but because the Spirit was there, because the meeting was focused on Christ, not that I heard necessarily what the speaker was specifically talking about, but I know that I felt the Spirit and it guided me, right? So, with that, I always try to keep that in mind when I'm teaching.
Hmm.
And so, if something is said that's maybe untowards or a little questionable, not that I think I know any more than anybody else, but, you know, uh, general authorities have taught us many times to keep things simple so that
Hmm.
everybody can understand it, right? I was when you were talking, I was thumbing through, um, Nephi, when he talks about quoting Isaiah. He
Hmm.
talked about that he wrote to more fully persuade them to believe in the Lord their Redeemer, and did liken all Scripture unto them, right?
Hmm.
So he
Yeah.
personalized it. He broke it down to their level,
Hmm.
and so that they could feel the Spirit and be persuaded to come closer to Christ. Um, so if something is said that maybe, you know, it's not that we raise our hand and say, "No, you're wrong."
Hmm.
It's not a classroom debate like it would be in a college or a university setting, right? A professor may want you to challenge his teaching, right?
Hmm.
Just to see if you're thinking on your feet. But in class, sometimes we just make a comment that maybe puts things back on the right path, right? To do it in a humble way, to
Hmm.
do it in a way to where the person who may have made the comment, whether it be the teacher or someone in class, doesn't feel attacked,
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
feel that you're coming at them, and
Hmm.
so that's one way that I've found to help with that situation, but
Hmm.
to also try to keep things focused on Christ.
So one thing that I hope, and with the channel that I have with my wife, one of the reasons that we've put that channel out there and why we do it is because One is that we hope to sort of combat or provide a perspective of what it's like to actually just be a Latter-day Saint living in our time. Like, what do we
Mhm.
do? What do we believe? Right? Those sort of basics. The other is not just for those who are not part of our faith, but those that are part of our faith, is to express the theology and the other ologies that go along with it. In our the podcast that we just recorded before we got on, we discussed eschatology, which is the study of what happens after this life, like where do we go, what is heaven, hell, all these types of things. So we explored that topic, and that we hope that that provides a level of understanding for those who are not of our faith, but also those that are of our faith, right? That people can gain some knowledge about our theology that actually are part of our church.
Mhm.
Because what I do find often is that, and this is true with all churches, is that you have a number or maybe even a higher percentage of people that just they may not actually know what our doctrine actually is, right? And that's okay, because one of the criticisms of our faith is that it is somewhat difficult to actually pin down what our doctrine is, because it is a living church. It is a church run by a living person named Jesus Christ, and it's at the head of that here on earth is a living prophet. So understanding what is the doctrine for today may not be exactly like it was in the 1800s, right? And that the prophet we have today is the adjudicating authority and does have the ability to say, no, this is the way that scripture is supposed to be applied in our day. It
Right.
may have been applied differently back in Nephi's time or back in Joseph Smith's time, but today it should be applied in this way. And
Right.
so that's the benefit of having a living prophet. So I do think that it is important for us to know our doctrine, because there are a lot of things that are just sort of hand me down doctrinal points that we think are true, that are just historically have always sort of, yeah, that is exactly what we believe,
Mhm.
right? Like
Right.
infinite regression, this idea that, that God was once man, and then we are now, like God, and that we are going to become God, all this kind of stuff. That sort of stuff finds its way within the church, and there's a
Mhm.
high degree of people that believe that that is the doctrine. Um, but there's a lot of people out there that are like, no, that's not our doctrine. That's not it, right? So understanding those points are beneficial, not critical, because like what you said, Jesus Christ is the most important part, and that's what we should focus on. But this leads me to a question for you. When it comes to
Yeah.
teaching elders quorum or teaching in general in the church, when should we say something? If we have, let's say we presuppose first of all that we have a decent understanding of the doctrine, right?
Mhm.
We've spent some time preparing for the lesson. We've looked at all the different angles. We've exhausted ChatGPT as much as we can to learn everything we can about this topic. And then we go in and then we hear the lesson taught by a great teacher like yourself. And then
Mhm.
someone out of blue brings up some sort of nonsensical, topic that may not be correct. And what is the process? What would you say is the process for us to actually address someone who says, should we just do nothing, just leave it, or should we say something? When is it appropriate? When should we not? When should we escalate to let's say ecclesiastical authority?
Sure. Uh, the last one I think is it may be a little easier, in my view, to answer, simply because if it gets to a point, I think, where you would need to speak to an ecclesiastical authority, then someone is, I think, is blatantly preaching or teaching false doctrine and trying to get others
Hmm.
swayed to their point of view, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which could lead to apostasy, or falling away from what the established doctrines and teachings of the church are, right?
Yeah. So someone
Um,
someone got a hold of some anti-Mormon literature. They've been swayed in that direction, the CS letter or something like that. And there's a lesson, and they bring that up and say, "Yeah, but what about this? And can blacks in the priesthood? What can how is that possible that that's actually a doctrine of the church, right?" So those types of really, really difficult topics that really aren't appropriate for a gospel doctrine setting or any kind of teaching setting, Is that what you're saying? That that's where you
Yeah,
should
I would
escalate?
say that. Um, but also, many, many years ago, I was in a ward where a gentleman claimed to be able to communicate with spirits,
Mhm.
and that he would go to homes to try to communicate with the spirits that were there, right? And he was trying to get other people within the congregation to join in his um spirit seances, if you will, right?
Right.
And that was a situation where the bishop had to step in and speak to him, and try to uh, get him back on the path, because, and I think this was the primary reason, he was trying to say that he was using the priesthood or the authority to act in God's name, as we say, to drum up these spirits, communicate with them, and things of that nature. And so that was a situation where the bishop had to step in and try to correct that situation. Um, on a simpler level, um, you mentioned how things can change in a living church, right? Um, it- Used to, back in the day, you could pay tithing with some chickens, or a crop
Mhm.
you harvested. You could bring that to the storehouse, right,
Mhm.
and use that as your tithes and offerings.
Mhm.
Then it was declared that 10% of your earned income was to be paid
Mhm.
by tithing, and that has been the standard
Mhm.
since then, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
There was an instance where someone brought up that you could still pay tithing in 10% of your time,
Mhm.
10% of your um, eggs that your chickens laid, and things like that, and
Mhm.
not pay tithing with the 10% of your earned income.
Mhm.
To me, that's just a situation where you would simply raise your hand and say, well, so and so in the last conference talked about tithing, and specifically that we are to pay 10% of our income
Mhm.
in tithes to the Lord. Um, just simply so that there's no question. There's no
Mhm.
there's no wondering exactly what it is that that principle entails.
Yeah. So you
Um,
use teachings of, of living prophets and apostles to help guide and correct through a spirit of love and general concern for the person. And I also think that it is fairly easy within a setting like that to determine what is the spirit of the person who's actually quoting something or saying something or bringing up a topic that may not be totally relevant. It very well could be that there is an honest question there, that someone really is curious as to blacks in the priesthood, and or about Adam God theory or any of these types of concepts where they may ask you, be like, hey, I'm not completely sure on this topic, but someone gave me this information, and does anybody know anything about this? That's very
right,
different than someone saying, yeah, well, what you believe is you actually believe this, and you all are wrong because you believe this, right? And that is a very different approach to bringing up some of those more difficult topics and nuanced topics than someone who's generally, curious. And so I think you're going to be able to
sure.
see that through the spirit of discernment as to if someone's legitimately has a concern, or if they're really trying to tear down and deconstruct someone's faith.
Yeah, and I think that for me, my personality is to try to look at it in that latter way, to give people the benefit of the doubt first. That maybe there is a legitimate question. Maybe they come from a different faith background, right? And they're just not quite sure. Maybe they did things a little different than in the church that they came from, or maybe they're visiting, and hearing everyone paying 10% of their tithing is completely new to them.
Yeah.
Whereas they're just used to the plate getting passed, and pull some a five or whatever out of your pocket
Hmm.
and throw it in the collection plate. It's not to say that their heart's in the wrong place, but that's how they interpret it,
Yep.
right? That law.
Yep.
And so I think that trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, first and foremost.
Mhm.
I think that in an area where there's someone who says, no, this is what you believe because this is what I saw on a video, this is what I saw on social media, this is
Mhm.
what my preacher told me. Most often, I've gotten those on maybe one-on-one
Yeah.
conversations,
Yeah.
and so it's um,
Mhm. I think the thing that maybe pops up more often than, let's say, someone who's throwing out some anti-Mormon stuff in the middle of a class setting is probably more political ideologies.
yes,
Someone who, it's in an election year and someone is very zealous about a particular candidate and or against another candidate, and then they're bringing up those topics within a lesson,
mhm,
trying to relate them, trying to sort of bring out any kind of opposing ideas by making a comment that would elicit a really strong response by members of the quorum or members of that
right,
class. I've seen that before. But let me ask you, because I'm gonna switch gears just a little bit and kind of project forward to September, because we have a big change that's coming up in September. So the class format is actually going to change, which I think will either help or hurt this topic here. I think it's going to help. But can you maybe explain what is the change that we have coming up in September when it comes to Sunday school and let's say that generally the second hour, right? We have 2 hour
right.
blocks. We have the first hour, which is the sacrament meeting, we got the second hour, which is saved for instruction, teaching, and so forth. Can you tell us how that second hour is going to be changing?
Yeah, so instead of every other week having elders quorum and Relief Society and youth, it's going to be split up into 25-minute classes.
Like
So
mini
we'll have
classes?
mini classes, basically. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you'll have Sunday school for
Hmm.
25 minutes where all of the adults will meet together. The youth will meet for their classes. And then you'll separate for another 25 minutes
Hmm.
for either elders quorum for the men or Relief Society for the women. And the youth
Hmm.
will have their curriculum. It's funny, I was talking to my state president the other day about this very topic, and there's bishops within our stake who are already asking, can we go ahead and start this, right? Because they love the idea.
Yeah.
And he was saying, no, we've got to wait. And the biggest reason was we don't have the youth curriculum yet, as to how they're gonna what they're gonna be doing with that.
Hmm.
But to our point for this discussion today, I see it helping because it will we only have time to be laser focused on what the topic at hand is for that day, right? We cut away the fat, right? And I was thinking, and we talked about our mission earlier, and I was thinking about how prepared we were how prepared we are today because of what our leader, President Gregson, taught us on our mission. Remember, he told us that baptismal services should not last more than 45 minutes,
Hmm. Yep.
right? That a lesson was to last no longer than an hour.
Hmm.
You help them feel the spirit, you pack up and you get out of there, right?
Hmm.
Because you don't want to linger to, you want the spirit strong when you're there and strong when you leave.
Hmm.
So I was thinking we're in a prime position because of those things that President Gregson taught us
Hmm.
to help implement this change, to learn how to cut away the fat,
Hmm.
to get straight to the point, to teach the pure doctrines of Christ, to help people feel and recognize the Spirit and come closer to the Savior. And then we end the class, move on to the next, where
Hmm.
we'll, you know, learn more. But
Yep.
that was something that I really uh, kind of had an aha moment as I
Hmm.
was contemplating this today and what the benefits would be
Yep.
for this change.
So in order for us to kind of maximize the benefits that you're alluding to, how is a teacher going to have to adjust, or what are they going to need to do, and how are they going to have to approach that 25 minutes, both in their preparation and their execution?
Sure. I think for me, you've really got to hone in and be very well prepared to lead the discussion, right? You can't leave any ambiguity or say, well, class, how do you feel about this particular topic that we're talking about, right? Because then you might sit there for several minutes in silence, things might get uncomfortable,
Hmm.
but you go through the lesson, pick one or two, maybe three topics, and you stay focused on them. When I was talking to my stake president, he said, if I were teaching, he's an educator by trade. He said, I would have one, two, maybe three questions. And those are the ones I would focus on asking the class. If I'm able to only ask one, great. If I'm able to ask two, great. Maybe next week, come back to one of those questions, right? If it's that important. But to stay focused on those core principles that you study and outline in the class, it's definitely going to be the onus of the teacher to make sure they know the material
Hmm.
so that they can lead and guide that 25 minutes, because you're not going to have time to
Yeah.
venture here, there, and everywhere.
And then on let's say the receiving side, so everybody that's coming to class, what would you recommend to everybody that's going to participate, either if they're just physically there or they actually want to make comments? What would be your recommendation for all of us that are going to be in those classes? Let's say if I was going to be a good class member of a class that you're teaching, what would be your expectations for me?
Read the lesson.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't, and I've been guilty of this, right? And especially with this old format that we're leaving, because it's every other week, you're like, man, what lesson are we on this week?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not teaching, you're like, huh?
Yeah.
You're looking at the gospel library app trying to figure out,
Hmm. What is it?
yeah, where are we at today? What scriptures are we talking about?
Yeah.
But the gospel library app is right there that tells you what the lesson is for Come Follow Me,
Hmm.
what the lesson is for Relief Society and Elders Quorum. Read and study those lessons prayerfully. Um, and if you do have any questions, even though it's 25 minutes, if it is if it is something that you really feel that you could benefit from, or maybe someone in the class could benefit from, ask. As a teacher, I'm not afraid of someone asking questions. But there again, we want to try to keep things heading down that road, and not go, down several different alleyways to try to get to the end of class.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate when there is a teacher who really is coming to teach. And again, we are a bunch of, for the most part, amateurs, right? A lot of us, we're not teachers by profession. You work in a paper mill. I work in a gym, right? So,
It shows.
we're yeah, we're I mean, I think we're good teachers, but it's not our profession, right? But I really appreciate when I can come to a class and the teacher is like really ready. Like they're like, okay, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to get through these topics. This is the main part of the topic. And I'm going to share with you all the stuff that I've learned over the last week. And if you have some comments you think are constructive, great. Feel free to share. But we got to get through these topics, right? As
Right.
opposed to, and I understand, like the church, I remember seeing a training video with Elder Holland, and he was demonstrating the proper way for you to conduct a Sunday school class. And it really was, he was more of a facilitator. He was
Mhm.
demonstrating that he, asked good questions and facilitate a discussion where everybody is teaching everybody. Now, the question is that the format that they would wish us to continue, or is that maybe more applicable to a longer 1 hour format? That I don't think we've gotten instruction specifically as to what those 25 minutes should be,
Right.
but I agree with you 100%. the teacher needs to be ready. He needs to have specific points that he's going to focus on, and then he should be very strategic as to the questions he asks and how many follow-up comments he is willing to allow before he moves on.
Right. Yeah, and I suspect that there may be an addendum to the Teaching in the Savior's Way manual,
Mhm. Mhm.
or some instruction coming from the general authorities of how they would like these classes to be conducted.
Mhm.
Um, but now I will say, from a personal standpoint, when I teach, I do not keep myself beholden to the idea that I have to get to the end of the lesson.
Mhm. Mhm.
That if there is a point or a couple of points that need to be emphasized
Mhm.
and that I feel is really hitting home
Mhm.
with one or more of the people in class, then to spend a little more time on that topic. I'm not one of these that I'm like, oh man, I got to get to the last
Yeah.
section of the lesson or the
Yeah.
last section of the talk,
Yeah.
right? Because I think if you do that, you're more focused on the the process and not the outcome of why you're there to teach about the Savior.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. I do believe that you are called and set apart to teach that class. And that comes with a certain level of inspiration and discernment to know what it is that you should focus on, and that through thoughtful prayer and your own effort in preparation, that you should be able to identify the areas that the Lord feels like this is what you should focus on. Now, if in the moment things start to go a different direction, I agree, you shouldn't just sort of say nope, nope, I've got to stick to these points. If the spirit is leading in a different way, follow the spirit, right? However, if you've come to the conclusion that this topic is the point and the main point of this lesson, and there are 3 or 4 other topics that sort of precede it that are required in order for you to sort of build into a crescendo to where you're giving enough background through those other points, that you should try your best to get through those sort of pre-points that you're trying to get through, to get to the point that you feel like the Lord has told you, "This is what we need to focus on." And that because that's where you're trying to go and that's what you feel inspired, I do believe you have the right to say, "Hey, guys, I love the comments.
Mhm.
However, we're going to move on to the next point because I really, really am excited to get to what I believe is the main point of this lesson. And we got to
Yeah.
get through some of these to get there. So we're going to move on. But if you want to talk about these topics after class, feel free. Come on up. Let's sit down and go over it. And I think that is also something that I hope in the Sunday school sort of with the presidency and so forth, whoever that might be. Now it can be a woman or a man,
You're right.
um,
Yeah.
that when they go through their teaching or their trainings with the teachers, that you do address how to handle people who are constantly wanting to comment on everything that you might say, constantly raising their hand. Every time you say a sentence, they're raising their hand because they've got something that they want to share that happened to them, 10 years ago, that's related to whatever you might be saying. So hopefully you learn some of those skills to be able to deflect and be able to move on. But I think you're called to teach that elders quorum class, and you have the right to inspiration as to what should be focused on in that class. So yeah, I
I
agree
think
with that.
that's Tyron, I think that's a beautiful point. For us, although we're amateurs, although we don't have, I would say the vast majority of us don't have theological degrees. We're not teachers by trade. Um, you know, uh, for us to really understand that with our calling and with being set apart in that calling, there is
Mhm.
power in that,
Yeah.
and that there is help from heaven to guide
Mhm.
you as you do your best to fulfill that calling.
Mhm.
Um, because it's not, the Lord doesn't take it lightly. So we shouldn't take it lightly in understanding that although we may feel like we're, man, why did they call me to be a teacher?
Mhm.
What do I know? What do I have to offer?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, we learn in the scriptures that the Lord qualifies whom he calls.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, for some that may come a little easier than others. For others, they may have to really work at it.
Mhm.
But, you know, you and I have seen it time and time again where miraculous things come out of your mouth when you just open it and rely on the Spirit and know that you're there for a reason.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I think that's great, and I think anybody who's watching this, I think is I'm sure they've gleaned some good insight. I am excited for what the other topics we have that we're going to go over in the coming weeks. I know we're going to touch on the topic of unrighteous dominion,
No.
and and when do we have when is unrighteous dominion? How does it manifest itself? And then what is then the converse of that, where we have love in our correction and so forth. And then the other topic that we're going to discuss in the next coming weeks is going to be on that mission topic. Is it something that we still see within the church as being, hey, you are called as a young man to serve a mission? Is that still really the case? Or will we, are people just kind of free to choose? Both may be true, but we're going to explore that a bit more. And I think this is a great little mini series we can do to get you on and get your perspective, because I think it's really great. And plus, it's great just to have a former mission companion on the podcast. So
Yeah.
that's
And
always good.
hopefully I'm not the only one because
Yeah.
I hope that hope we're able to see a lot of familiar faces on here. But this has been great. I've loved this discussion, and I hope that something that we've said helps somebody. I know that this discussion has helped me. It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it, and
Hmm.
the way I see it, the world's a messed up place, and anytime we get to talk about the gospel and reminisce about spiritual experiences and things like that, all the better.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm going to try to get this out midweek. It's Sunday right now, and I can't think of a better thing to do on the Sabbath day than to explore some of these gospel topics. But we'll get this out midweek. And yeah, we'll be back together next Sunday to do something similar with those topics I mentioned, and then we'll just keep this ball rolling. And if there are other people out there that's watching that let's say is from the Utah Provo Mission, or hey, we know each other, or you want to get on the podcast, please reach out. You can comment below, and we can see if that's something that's possible. But I think it's
Yeah.
been fantastic.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And like I said, we'll have to get our wives together to talk about anime and their shared
Yeah.
interest. So yeah,
I think we can find some room here. I have like this much room for
I
her.
think so.
So
Listen, I know you feel the same way. My wife is a lot better looking than I am, and I'm sure people would enjoy hearing from her much
Oh
more than they would
yeah.
like
Oh
to hear
yeah.
from me.
Oh
So
yeah. They're probably I know people watching is like, where's Sarah? Why is Tyron doing this? Come
yeah,
on.
yes.
You got the bottom of the barrel on this one.
Like really?
All right,
That's good
Jay. Then I'll
stuff.
see you in 7 days. All right.
Yes, sir. Take it
Okay,
easy, buddy.
bud. All right,
Have a
man.
good one.
See you soon.
All right,
All right. Bye
bye.
bye.